Okay, it's sort of 4 minutes past now, and so I think we'll make a start. So welcome everybody. I expect you were out making hay or doing something out in this amazing weather. I'm stuck in a very hot London. It's good to be back with the office open. So I'm just going to make a brief introduction and chair the session. Mark Bridgman, I'm CLA President. We are good. Janet Hughes is going to be joining us, who heads up Defra's future farming team, and I'll introduce her when she speaks. But we've also got Susan Twining, who's head of the CLA's land use team, leads a team here in London and across the regions. And I'm going to ask Susan in a second to make a few introductory comments and to really set the scene. And then we'll turn to Janet after that, after about 10 minutes, who'll make some very brief comments, and then we'll open it up to questions. This is really an opportunity for all of us to be able to ask questions of Janet and the Defra team about the agricultural transition. So with that, I will hand over to you, Susan. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mark, and good morning, everybody. I'll just make a start on the presentation. I'm going to cover some key points in about 10 minutes. The slides are going to be available afterwards, so please, you don't need to scribble down lots of notes because there's quite a lot of content jammed into these, I'm afraid. So I was just going to start really with a bit of a history. Where are we? How have we got here? Not going to dwell on this a lot, but back after the vote to leave the EU, the first sort of move towards developing new farming policy to move away from the Common Agriculture Policy was the Health and Harmony consultation in 2018. Now, over the period between then and now, there's been a massive amount of work done looking at developing new policy, and we are now at a point where we are actually in touching distance of starting the implementation phase. So the big paper came out last November, which was the Agricultural Transition Plan, that looked at across the whole piece about what's going to be changing. Janet is going to say more about the overall plan from that later. What I wanted to focus on in my slides is the new bit, the stuff that's going to be available from next year, which is the Sustainable Farming Incentive 2022. And I've just got one slide about the payment approach because there's some important messages in that as well. So that's the area I'm focusing on, but there is a lot more around the whole agricultural transition, as I say. So the Sustainable Farming Incentive, for those of you who haven't had the chance to look at all the documents, this is one of the 3 environmental land management schemes. It's going to be focusing on sustainable farming practices, and critically that these practices are above the regulatory requirements. So you will still need to comply with all the regulations that we have for the industry. And for any activities above that, then they'll be included in the Sustainable Farming Incentive. It will be available to all eligible farmers. Initially, that is just going to be current BPS applicants, but over time that is expected to open out to other eligible farmers. And it's going to be based on standards. Now I'm going to go into a bit more detail about the standards shortly, but overall, the standards are a set of requirements, a set of actions that are set out over 3 levels of ambitions, each with a different payment rate. So there's an introductory level, an intermediate level, and an advanced level. And each of those standards, the standards are going to be gradually introduced and regularly updated. So for 2022, we're going to have the first 3 standards available and an annual health and welfare review. And then there will be further standards introduced over time. Those of you who have looked at the SFI pilot, the pilot is starting this year and we'll be looking at the first 8 standards. So there are other standards available to look at, but only 3 are going to be available for 2022. So the SFI standards, the ones that are going to be available in 2022, there's going to be one on arable and horticulture soils, one on improved grassland soils, and a moorland and rough grazing standard. And then there will also be the annual health and welfare review, which I'll say a bit more about later as well. There are lots of other standards that might be developed. There are already some that are being tested through the SFI pilot, but there's a whole range of others that are being looked at and may be introduced in the future. I won't go into all those in detail. You can see what they are on the screen. So having a bit more detailed look at the arable and horticulture soil standard, and this will give you an idea of how these are shaped. There are 3 levels: introductory, intermediate and advanced, and then there are a number of activities that need to be done, and all the activities for each of the levels need to be achieved. So you can't pick and choose, you must do the package of measures. And as you go up the introductory, intermediate and advanced, you need to comply with the lower levels as well. So what's being looked at for the arable and horticulture soil standard is a basic soil assessment, which will be reviewed every 2 years. And that will include an initial assessment of soil texture, drainage, slope, connectivity. There will be an annual inspection, or you will need to do an annual inspection of at least 20% of land for soil structure, biological indicators such as earthworm counts, and a soil organic matter analysis. And you'll be required to address any compaction issues on high-risk land. So that will be applied to everybody, whatever level you're in. And then there are other requirements, such as establishing green cover in the winter on high-risk land, actions to increase soil organic matter, use of no-till, low-till or minimum tillage techniques, and then creating a soil management plan. But that last one is only for the advanced level. And as you can see at the bottom, the payment rates increase depending on the level that you go into. With the advanced level, the payment rate of £60 a hectare. But as you can see, the requirements are higher for the advanced level. If we look at the improved grassland soils, similar structure with 3 different levels that are available. The first, with a number of activities that need to be achieved in each of those levels. For introductory, for all levels, there's a basic soil assessment with a review every 2 years, similar to the arable one. And then different requirements looking at adding or retaining legumes, herbs, and a grass mix in the grasslays. Maintaining permanent grassland, so that's not ensuring that you're not ploughing any grassland, and if you're reseeding, that you do it in ways to maintain that sward. Managing stock density on wet soil and creating a soil management plan, and there are area requirements, and they increase for each of the different levels, and as does the payment rate, as you can see at the bottom, going up to £70 a hectare for the advanced level. There is a lot of information. I've just given you the very main headlines on that. There's a lot of information on these on the .gov website. If you search for Agricultural Transition Plan June 2021 Progress Update, you'll get the information and you can filter through onto the different standards and get the details from those. We've also got an Agricultural Transition Hub on the CLA website, and we've got links to all the documents as well. If you're looking for more practical information, then there's technical information available from AHDB that can give you a bit of a background about why, how these things can be done, as well as other sources of advice. The third standard that's going to be released in 2022 is the moorland and rough grazing standard. But you can see from my slide that there is not any information on this at the moment. It is in development, and there's a lot of work going on both in Defra but also in the co-design process, where the Defra is consulting with practitioners and others about what should be in that standard and how it should be structured. And that information will be fully available in November. And perhaps Janet might say something about that later on as to the current state of progress on that one. Finally, what is going to be available for 2022 is an animal health and welfare review. This is part of the animal health and welfare pathway. So the pathway is going to be a programme of measures that will build a national picture of animal health and welfare, but it will help individual farmers on their business control endemic disease and support high animal welfare standards. It's a really important part of the overall agricultural transition plan, because the diseases and pests and livestock and welfare cost the industry and government a vast amount of money. So it's a really important area to be addressing. So the annual health and welfare review will be an annual funded vet-led visit to review the animal health and welfare on the business. It will initially be focusing on pigs, sheep, beef and dairy, but it will be opened up to others over time. And part of the review will provide a bit of guidance on what you can do on the farm, but also direct you to other support such as grants and advice, and there's also a potential for a development of a payment by results for animal welfare in the offing as well. So the initial stage is this annual health and welfare review, but there will be a bigger programme around the animal health and welfare pathway as time goes on. I said I was going to mention about the payments approach, and this is the principles that Defra published a couple of weeks ago about how they're looking at the payment rates for environmental land management schemes. I think the one that I will draw your attention to is probably bullet 3, which is something that is raised very frequently when we're out and about and talking to people about the new programme, and that is that payments will recognise the value of existing natural assets and don't unfairly disadvantage those who are already protecting and enhancing these assets. And I think that where people have already committed to high environmental management, this is a really important part of the payment principles. I think the other thing I'd just like to highlight on this slide is that there is currently a review of payment rates across, for countryside stewardship that will be published shortly and will be applying to existing schemes as well as new ones. And I think that's an important point for going forward as well, is that Defra is aiming to look at, when they're looking at the payment rates, they're looking at parity across all schemes. For example, the new English woodland creation offer has got payment rates, new payment rates in there, which are more attractive than they were before. But when that starts to operate within the ELM scheme, then there will be parity across the different programmes. So you shouldn't feel nervous about going into schemes early, because there will be parity across all of them. So just a final slide from me, really, which is a summary of how we're approaching the SFI 2022 as an organisation, and I think it's a really welcome early introduction. It has put immense pressure, I think, on the development of a scheme to bring it in at this stage, but that we have reached a point where it can be introduced, and it is a very welcome in bridging the BPS gap. BPS payments will be cut from this year, and it will be important to have this as a bridging scheme as we move to the new scheme. It'll also help build understanding and knowledge gradually, and Defra is looking at this as it's almost like a national pilot, if you like, because they will be taking on learning from the early introduction for building it up as time goes on. And I think that's a really important point that we need to understand, is that SFI 2022 and the whole ELM programme will develop over time. There are things around the standards, obviously there'll be new standards coming along, and the requirements may change or be refined. The payment rates and budget allocation is still, although there are clear payment rates for now, these payment rates may well be reviewed and changed over time. Eligibility is still an area that needs to be changed and discussed in more detail as we learn more from the pilots. And there's also a discussion around the agreement length, particularly for SFI. The agreement length of 1 year is popular for some, but others would prefer a longer term agreement. So that's something that's under discussion. And similarly, the monitoring and earned recognition, how is the monitoring going to be done? How can we make sure that it's proportionate and ensure that people who are maybe in assurance schemes are recognised for that when it comes to the inspections. So that's all I've got to say. I'll now hand back to Mark, who will introduce Janet. Thank you.
Susan, thank you very much. And before I do, one thing I forgot to mention at the start was anyone wanting to ask questions, if you can just type it into the Q&A bar, which you should find at the bottom of your screen, and I will endeavour, after Janet's made some opening remarks, to sort of to draw out those questions, and I've also been emailed some by others. Please put your questions there. I'd just like to introduce Janet. Welcome, Janet. Thank you very much for joining us. Janet heads up the future farming team, so has a huge task. She joined Defra, well, probably only 18 months ago now, or less than that, and is doing a fantastic job. There's a huge remit. Obviously, we're talking about one bit of elms today, but we might delve into other areas of the future farming team, because there's the different elements of ELMS. There's the productivity schemes that are going to come forward. There's the exit scheme. There's new entrance scheme. There's resilience schemes, a whole myriad of things that are coming forward, all of which sort of reports into Janet. So we've got the key person with us today, and so please think of your questions. During this Q&A session, we're also going to do a couple of polls just to gauge people's engagement with ELMS and interest. So have your fingers on the buzzers for later on. So with that, I'm just going to hand over to Janet. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Mark, and thanks everybody for dialing in today. I hope you can hear me okay. I've got different headphones on today because I've been told my other ones are rubbish, so I'm hoping you can hear me all right with these ones. Thank you very much for dialing in today. I'm looking forward to the questions and discussion. As Mark says, I've been in my role for actually just a year in the Future Farming and Countryside programme, and I'm the director responsible for the delivery of all of the things we're doing to move out of the common agricultural policy in England and introduce new arrangements to support and promote farming. And in particular, the things that are included in our programme, just so you know what the scope is of things you can ask me about, include the existing schemes and improving those and making them work better, phasing out direct payments and instead starting to put those into existing schemes, and then as we roll them out, the new environmental land management schemes. And there are 3 of those. There's a sustainable farming incentive, which we've had some further detail about today, and that's for all farmers anywhere to enter and to do actions that will be positive for the environment, climate and animal welfare on your land. There's also the local nature recovery scheme, which is much more about doing the right things in the right places and facilitating local collaboration to set priorities and take actions to improve the environment and combat climate change and improve welfare. And then the landscape recovery scheme, which is much more about long-term, large-scale habitat restoration and land use change. So things like peatland restoration, woodland creation, rewilding would all fit into that category. So those are the 3 environment schemes, and that's what people often talk about when they think about the programme I'm responsible for. But there are 2 other aspects of the programme. One is that we want to improve the way we regulate and prevent damage in the countryside. And in particular, we want to make sure that our regulatory regime is fair and effective and proportionate. And we are often told by people, as I'm sure many of you will also agree, that the way we currently regulate farming in the countryside is disproportionate and punitive on things that don't matter so much and not as effective on things that do matter so much. So we're working to flip that round so we enforce properly where it matters and we don't come down on you like a ton of bricks where you've made an honest mistake that's not of any material consequence. And then the final aspect of what we're doing is supporting prosperity in the sector, because we're trying to achieve 2 things at the same time here. We're trying to make sure that we have a prosperous, competitive agriculture sector producing healthy, nutritious food for the population, and also that we get much better environment and climate and animal welfare outcomes from that sector alongside food production. And so to support the productivity and production side, we also have a range of schemes that will be coming into place to support innovation, research and development, and also to support farmers to apply the new innovative techniques and practices and technology on their farms, and also to invest in efficiency, technology and equipment that will make you more carbon, produce less carbon and be less wasteful. So taking all those things together, the idea is that they will result in a prosperous sector producing healthy food and also producing environmental outcomes. And we're doing all of this in partnership with farmers and membership organisations like the CLA, because if we don't do that, if we don't make sure what we're doing works for farmers, then we don't get any of those outcomes that we're looking for. And so I'm really keen to hear today any feedback that you might have or any questions you might have. And I'll also just put in the chat, if you can access that, if you go to the speech bubble at the bottom of your screen, you should see some chat there, and I will just share my email address. And if you don't get a chance to ask your question today, or I don't know the answer, which is entirely possible because I'm responsible for a lot of things, and I don't know every single aspect of every single detail of all of them, then you're welcome to drop me an email, or you can also, if you do Twitter, then you can find me on Twitter. I'm very active there, answering questions and engaging in conversations. And do get in touch if you want to get involved in any of our co-design activities to make these schemes work. If you think things don't work currently and you want them to work better, then step up and get involved, and we'd love you to get in touch. So there's my details. Contact me afterwards if you'd like.
Brilliant,
Thanks,
Janet. Thank you for that introduction. I'm just going to start off with a couple of questions, hog the floor if I can, just it might be useful sort of scene setting. Specifically around SFI, which Susan was talking about, starting next year. Is there anything you can tell us at this stage about timescale? You know, will we be doing it when we're doing our BPS application, or will it be at some other time? And linked to that, payments. There's talk about it being much more timely and monthly or quarterly. Can you give us any guidance on that, or when those decisions will be made? That's my first question.
Yes, very happy to. So in the Sustainable Farming Incentive, we've already opened up the pilot for applications. We had about 2,000 farmers interested in taking part in that. So if you're one of those, then welcome to the gang. But for most people, it will be the main scheme that we roll out next year that you'll be interested in. And the plan is that we will confirm, we've published the standards for that and the payment rates. We're doing some engagement over the summer just to tweak those and make sure we've got them just right. We haven't inadvertently put something in there that accidentally excludes some people or isn't deliverable. And we'll confirm those standards and payment rates in November. And then we'll open up the scheme for applications in the spring next year and start making payments before the end of the year. Those are a little bit flexible, those timings. You'll notice I didn't give you a specific date, and that's because we're working on the delivery now. We don't want to promise you a date and then fail to deliver it, but we will in November, as we get closer, be able to start confirming dates a bit more confidently for you. But it'll be at the same sort of time as you're doing your countryside stewardship in applications in the same period of time. And on the payment frequency, sorry, shall I do the second part? I'm sorry, I nearly forgot. The second part was about payment frequency, where, as you know, you currently get an annual payment. We are looking at paying more frequently because we know that doesn't help with cash flow, and that's one of the reasons farmers are put off from taking part in schemes. We haven't decided yet whether it will be monthly, quarterly, or some other regularity. We're working that out through a combination of talking to farmers about what's most helpful and also working out what's deliverable from our perspective, and so that we can maintain our confidence that we can make payments on time and accurately. So we'll confirm that later this year, having done some further user research and some further technical work to work out what we think is the right sweet spot. But it's unlikely to be annual. It's likely to be more frequent than that, I would say.
Great. Well, I think that will be well received. Just one other one, and then we'll open up, is the other two elements of ELMS, local nature recovery and landscape recovery. Could you just give us an idea of where you see the sort of timescales of those, when they're starting, when you see the pilot starting to kick in, and as farmers and landowners, how can we, who will be eligible and who won't be eligible for any of those, and linked to that, how can we best prepare if we're starting to think about that? Thank you.
Yeah, very happy to talk about that. So let's do landscape recovery first. So that's the large scale land use change or restoration types of projects, and those are going to be over a long period of time, maybe 20 years, and possibly even have covenants attached to the land. So if you're someone who's thinking about doing a serious investment over a long period of time to change your land use, then that's the scheme for you. And the first 10 projects for that will be signed, the first 10 contracts into that will be signed by next year. We're doing some market engagement over the summer. We'll open up the competition in the autumn, and that will be competitive. We'll be looking for bids, and we'll be choosing bids based on the level of outcome that they can actually deliver and how aligned they are to the things that we're trying to achieve. And then we will continue rolling that out gradually from there, but we'll do that quite carefully because these are long-term big projects and we don't want to rush and get it wrong. So that's landscape recovery. If you want to prepare to start getting involved in that, then I think the best thing to do is start thinking about, if you are thinking about a serious land use change project, then talk to your local NE representative and all the others that you would normally talk to, and thinking about how to plan that and thinking about whether landscape recovery is the way forward for you on it. You can also get in touch with me and I'll put you in touch with the team who can point you in the right direction if you're in that category. That's going to be a category for a few people though. For most people, it's going to be Sustainable Farming Incentive, and that, to start with, is open to all those who are eligible for basic payments. We would like to extend it over time to smaller farms and those who are outside of basic payments, but we're going to start with that because we have to start somewhere and we want to start small and build from there. So that's the SFI eligibility. Local nature recovery has a broader eligibility and is designed to support local collaboration. And so if you're interested in getting involved in that, the most important thing probably is to start getting involved in a discussion group or a cluster group, or if you haven't got one, set one up, and you can get support for that through the facilitation fund. But it's work, and also there are some really good examples around of people who have done really good work, including the project that you've been involved in, Mark, the 23 Burns project, setting up discussion groups and collaboration groups for farmers to start thinking about what the local priorities might be and what you might want to deliver that involves all of you collaborating together. So if you're not already in one of those groups, people pretty universally, at least those who I've spoken to about it, have a very positive experience of being in those groups. They learn a lot from their peers. They really enjoy working with other farmers and they get a lot done. So that's the best way to think about that. And the local nature recovery scheme, we've been doing some pilots of local nature recovery strategies, which might form the basis of some of this local priority setting. We've done some pilots of that. We just published a report about it. We're going to do some more testing and piloting over the next year, and then we'll start gradually rolling that out from 2023 onwards, and then it will be available to all from 2024.
Okay, thank you. I'm now just going to turn to some. There's lots of questions coming in, so thank you. It's one about standards, so Sfi standards. Yeah. How will you decide on the new standards? There was a range that Susan mentioned that might be coming in, and others I know that you've looked at. And when will they be brought in? And there's a specific question related to that about salt marshes as an example. Is that something that you would consider? And while we're on those standards,
yeah.
The other one that I've had in from someone at the Country Trust charity bringing people onto schools is education. Is that something that you see that could sit in SFI and be broadly available to everyone, or would that be in other areas? Thank you.
Yeah, I can answer all of those. So on education, as you know, currently that's supported through countryside stewardship. We haven't decided yet whether that's best place to be in part of SFI or best place to be part of local nature recovery. We're doing some work this year to map out what are all the things we currently pay for through our existing schemes and where do we think they'll end up. And that's part of our design process for our new scheme. So we haven't decided yet. The best way to keep doing that at the moment is go through existing schemes. And keep watching brief. I should have said, by the way, we've got a blog. I'm going to share the link in the chat, see if I can talk and type at the same time. Which, if you're interested in keeping up to date on what we're doing, then just go to this blog, defrafarming.blog.gov.uk. It's, I think, the correct address. Perhaps I'll get the right address and then share it when I'm not talking. But follow that, and you'll see as we publish new information on there. So that's education. Salt marshes, I would have thought, would be most appropriately dealt with through local nature recovery, because that's the sort of area where it's sensitive and we want to make sure we're doing the right thing in the right place. So local nature recovery would be the scheme I would expect salt marshes to fall into. And you might, if you were doing a kind of massive restoration project, you might even enter into landscape recovery for a salt marsh restoration project. And in terms of how we choose the standards, we published the document we published just at the end of June set out some criteria for how we'll choose the standards that come next in SFI. And what we said there was that we would select them based on how much of an outcome we think we can get through the standard. And the outcomes we're interested in are things like biodiversity, carbon reduction and sequestration, water quality, air quality, flood risk mitigation, and beauty and heritage. And we particularly like standards and actions that contribute to multiple of those outcomes. So we're not choosing one or the other, but one of the reasons we've chosen soil as a place to start is because that can contribute to multiple different outcomes in a particular area. So one of the criteria is outcomes. The second is this going to be attractive and accessible to farmers? And are they likely to actually take it up? Because if they're not, then it can be as beautiful as you like, but there's not a fat lot of point introducing it. So those two things, they're not in a hierarchy. Those two things have to be considered hand in hand. Those are the main criteria. I'm sure we mentioned a couple of others. I can't remember what they were, but those are the main ones. And if I find any more, then I'll put them in the chat.
Yeah, just to give some perspective, we got 3-4 starting next year. It will be. Yeah. Can you, in your mind, is it sort of 8 in 23 and then 12 in 24? Is that the sort of scale?
Yeah. So we haven't decided the exact numbers, but we do think that we are planning on introducing these first 3 standards next year. So we've got the arable and horticultural soils, improved grassland soils, moorland, and then the animal health and welfare review. And then we'll gradually add in more standards. And what we'll do is we'll test the new standards in the pilot. And then once we get confident, we'll start adding them into the main service, and we'll do that incrementally between 2022 and 24. And the reason we're doing that is because we think taking this sort of incremental test and learn approach is much more likely to result in a scheme that actually works for people than designing it all and switching it all on one day and discovering the whole thing falls to pieces, as you'll all know we've done in the past unsuccessfully. So that's why we decided to do it in that way.
This is a very specific thing, but it's something I was thinking of earlier as well, but it comes from Francis Fitzherbert Brockholz's question on guidance. Can the guidance on the website be improved? It's difficult to find information and will be better in PDF documents. Specifically, it would be good to have all the payment rates in one place. And I think, you know, we're just at the start of this journey, and there's going to be so many schemes. I think how you get that out to 100,000 land managers is going to be a real challenge. So I think there needs to be some work around that.
Definitely there does. So this is particularly tricky for the pilots, because part of the point of the pilot is that we improve as we go, and that means we adjust and amend things as we go. And so if we were to send you out all the hard copy, then next week it would be out of date, and we don't want to have people looking at different versions of things. But we have had quite a lot of feedback about the guidance, that it's too complicated, there's too much in terms of the quantity of pages and the difficulty of navigating it, and we are looking at how to improve that. And I do get that question a lot about, can we have a printable PDF? The rules on gov.uk are that we're not supposed to provide printable PDFs, but we do make the pages printable. So we have to do our research and understand what the need is there and how we can best meet it. If you're interested to get involved in helping make sure that this guidance works, then I've just realised I've mistyped the blog address, so I'll just post it again. But if you go to that blog, you can see how to get involved. And the way we design our guidance and services is that we build a bit, and then we show it to some farmers and see how it works for them, and then we build a bit more, and then we do the same, and we repeat that. And that's the process that we've started quite recently to do for the main service. And we're always on the lookout for farmers who are interested to test these things for us. So if you are willing to give us an hour of your time to help us make this stuff better, then please get in touch, and we'd love you to help.
Great. I mean, I get those blogs. You just have to sign up, and they're great because it just keeps you in the loop. And so, Francis, you've talked yourself into a job there. So he will be very good.
Yes.
He's a very he knows his stuff. Is very good ex-lawyer, so he'll be excellent. Right. We're going to move on.
Well, please
now.
do get in touch.
Yeah. Sorry. It's really around payment rates now. There's just a couple of questions come through. One was on CS, and it's very encouraging that you're reviewing existing CS agreements and the CS payment rates. And there was a specific question about could they be revised down as well as up? And then linked to that, just while we're on payment rates, is question here: how are SFI payment rates decided, and will all the value be taken up with costs? So perhaps you could just talk, Janet, about that sort of 30% increase, the new payment methodology, and how that will all link together. Thanks.
Yes. So what we've said about, we published a couple of weeks ago some principles, 3 weeks ago now, some principles by which we would set our payment rates. And the first of those is that we want to make sure that the payment rates are actually viable and attractive for farmers, because if they're not, then you're not going to do it, are you? And we know that the existing payment rates for countryside stewardship are not viable for some farmers, and that's why we're reviewing them now. And we are undertaking a review to look at an updated assessment of the costs that we take into consideration, and of the income foregone, and of the management time that we consider as part of those standards. We've done that already for the standards that we're introducing for 2022. And the result of that is the payment rates we've just recently published. And what that resulted in was payment rates that are about 30% higher than they would have been had we used the existing method for calculating the rates. That's not to say that on every single standard it will be a 30% increase, because there's different considerations about costs and income foregone for each of the standards. So, but that's where we've got to on soils. For the rest, we're doing the review now, and we'll publish the updated rates before the end of this year. And you'll see there our kind of updated assessment. There is a broader set of questions about how we decide payment rates, and we have looked at other ways of doing them. So, for example, we've looked at, could we do payment by results for environmental schemes? And the reason that we haven't done that yet is because where we've looked at that in tests and trials, we haven't yet found a way of doing that that's actually fair and robust and reasonable, because depending on your soil type, depending on the weather, depending on nature, you might get a different outcome from the same action on one farm, or even in one field, than you do in a different place. And that's not fair if you're the farmer who is in good faith entered into that action. And so we pay for actions still, but we are looking at how we calculate the payments for actions to make sure that it does make business sense for you to take them. And we have to balance in doing that. We have to get good value for taxpayer money. So we can't be paying massively over the odds for things in order to make it attractive. And also, if we did that, then fewer farmers would be able to participate. But we don't want to make the payments so low that nobody wants. They don't make sense. You can't even cover your costs, much less get rewarded for the goods that you're producing. So we've got to strike the right balance. So the rates we've published for 2022, we've said are indicative for now. We'll confirm them in November, and then we will keep them under review to get them just at the right level over the course of the transition.
Okay, thank you. There's a question about sort of farm profitability and productivity. So supporting farming focuses on environmental delivery, but there's a real concern about the profitability of farming businesses. What is Defra doing to support farming and to monitor the impacts of the new policy? So I think maybe you could bring into that how you're going to measure. We all know how reliant the industry is on BPS. Are you going to keep updating that profitability analysis? And also linked to that, perhaps you could just touch on the productivity schemes that I know are coming forward later this year, and how we as farmers and land managers can start thinking about that.
Yeah, happy to cover that. So in terms of the impacts, we published an evidence compendium, grandly titled, a couple of years ago in September 2019 that summarised all the evidence we had at that stage about farm profitability on different types of farm, different sizes, different locations, and what the practices are likely to be that are associated with more profitability and less profitability, and also the degree of dependence on basic payments to support profitability. And that gave us all the information that we used to decide that we needed to do a 7-year transition and not an overnight transition, so that farmers would have time to plan and adapt. And we are updating that analysis now as part of doing our business case for our next phase of delivery, and we'll publish an updated set of numbers about that in due course, probably later this year, depending on the timing of our business case being approved and that analysis being completed, which is not in my hands. The completion is, but the approval isn't. I have to go along with the wider government process on that one. But it will be within the next year for sure that we publish some updated numbers on that, and we certainly will be keeping that up to date and monitoring that through the course of the transition, because we, as I said, we want to make sure we've got a prosperous, profitable sector producing healthy food and also environment outcomes from that sector. So we will definitely be monitoring that. In terms of farm profitability, we think that there's broadly 3 categories of things to do to improve productivity, which you'll all be very familiar with. And I'm not suggesting that farmers don't do any of these already, but we think certainly in the case of the less profitable farms, there are opportunities to do more under each of these headings. And what you do depends on your particular farm type and location and size and all of those other factors. But the 3 things are increasing your income, which you might do through taking part in agri-environment schemes, but you might also do it in other ways. You might sell carbon sequestration on the private market. You might do more diversification. You might think about marketability or shortening your supply chain. So there's increasing your income. And the way that we might help with that through our programme is we're going to be providing free business planning advice from this summer through 19 organisations that already exist in the sector, including private charitable membership organisations, where you can think about what are the options for you on your particular farm, and that we've made £10.7 million available for that this year, and we'll scale up the offer next year for anyone who would like some free advice to think about planning. And we're also supporting innovation, research and development and productivity grant support in order to help farmers invest in technology and equipment and practices that can help to improve profitability by, for example, making your goods more marketable by having better storage for your grain, or what have you. So that's improving your profit, improving your income, reducing your costs. The ways that will help with that, again, are through productivity investment, so grant support for small and large kit, technology and practices, business planning and support. And the sorts of things we're talking about there are nutrient management, feed efficiency, breed selection, perhaps reducing your fertilizer use, reducing your inputs, but still maintaining the same level of production because you're just using them more smartly, for example. So that's reducing your costs. And then there's reducing waste, and lots of the waste happens through pests and diseases, as you know, and the animal health and welfare pathway will help with that by supporting improved animal health and welfare on farms, and also the better learning and development for farmers that we're investing in through the Institute for Agriculture and Horticulture. And also the productivity advice can also help there, because you can invest in kits to help reduce waste, improve storage, etc. on your farm. So through all those 3 actions, obviously not all of them are applicable to everybody, and many of you will be saying, I already do all of that, thanks, and in which case, fantastic, congratulations. But there is always something more that we can all do to be better in our jobs, isn't there? And I certainly try to improve every day. And so we're trying to make a range of different types of support, advice available for anybody to think through what's the right thing to do on your farm and how is that going to work.
So you mentioned the resilience, and I know that came out last week. There's just going to be a range of different providers who are going to be able to come out and help advise farmers. On the productivity, just a quick follow-up, the timescale of when we're going to get more details on that, and do you think, will it be similar to the old schemes where it was about 40% grant funding against the total, or might that change?
It will change, but it will change around the margins. So it's not going to be completely different, but you might, for example, you might see different levels of government investment depending on the particular value of the investment to the outcomes that we want to see. So we can support both productivity and also carbon reduction, for example. So we'll get further details about the Farming Investment Fund by October. We'll be able to start applying then. Innovation, research and development, the first competitions will open up later this year, and then there'll be much more coming next year. I should have mentioned we also do have support in place for new entrants, and we're co-designing what that should look like now because we know how difficult it is for people to get access. But I'm making an assumption that's probably slightly less relevant to the audience here, so I haven't dwelt on it, but we can get into that if people would like.
But on that, I know there's lots of some of the larger CLA members running with big estates are involved in that co-design process, helping to think about, you know, what they would look for to help bring new entrants onto those. I'm going to do one more question. I'm going to do a couple of polls just to be, I think it will be very interesting. But this is sort of a very specific, quick question from L. Emmett. When will there be information on payment rates for LNR and LR, those 2 other schemes? And is it safe to assume they will be similar to CS?
So the payment rates for each, we've published the principles by which we'll set payment rates, which set out how we're going to do that in a fair way, how we want to crowd in private investment rather than crowding it out, so that you can have both private and public investment on your land, and how we're going to focus on achieving outcomes. And what we've said is we'll publish the actual payment rates for each scheme as we launch each scheme. So local nature recovery is still at the early piloting stage for that and working out what is the role of a local convener, how do you do multi-party agreements and priority setting, and how should that work. The payment rates will be set as we begin the early rollout of the scheme from 2023 onwards, but you would expect us to publish information about that well in advance during next year so that you're not waiting all the way until the scheme's launched. And I think it would be a reasonable expectation to expect some read across between the updated countryside stewardship rates and the new scheme, because a lot of the actions are likely to be things that we do actually pay for already, because the science hasn't particularly changed about what it's good to do, and we're just wanting to make it more accessible and attractive for more people to do those things, and for people to collaborate where that's an appropriate thing to do. So that's why we'll do the payment rates there. Landscape recovery is a different kettle of fish, because those are bespoke agreements. They're bespoke contracts for particular projects. So we won't say here's a load of payment rates. We'll instead say here's the budget, here's the particular things we want to achieve through this budget, and we welcome bids, and then we'll review them competitively, much more like a tendering process rather than a sort of here's a list of actions and how much we'll pay for them, which is what you'll see more in local nature recovery and SFI. Okay,
I'm going to pause there and ask Letty to put up the first 2 questions, and it's just be interesting to get you know, the audience here for us all to give our views. So this is really about elms generally, and so question 1, if you can just click on this, and so are you intending to take part in any of the elm schemes in the future? Yes or no? And then which elm schemes are you considering for your business in the future? And you can click, you know, a couple of them or 3 of them or none of them. So if you wouldn't mind all voting now, and while Janet and I keep chatting, and then we'll see the results. Janet, while people are doing that, there's a question from Alistair Lowe. This is really about advice. Understood that SFI was going to be straightforward and not need advisors. What do you see the role of advisors will be, and is this being tested in the pilots?
Yes, it is. So we've been testing the idea of advisors and what advice is needed through our tests and trials, where we have more than 3,000 people, including farmers, taking part in on-farm and on-the-ground tests to test out various aspects of the new schemes and how they'll work. And one of the things we've been looking at is advice. And no surprise, we've discovered that advice is very important, and in particular, having somebody that you can ring from the Defra group of organisations who can help you out when you get in a muddle is really important for local nature recovery in particular. But also, we think there's a really important role for professional commercial advisors to be advising you on what you do on your farm in the same way that the vet advises you what to do to look after your animals' health and welfare. And what we don't want is for people to have to pay for advice just to fill in our forms because we made them so complicated. So that's why we're working to really simplify the service and really simplify the guidance to make it so that you can self-serve, particularly for sustainable farming incentive, where the actions are universal, they're good to be taken anywhere, and it ought to be possible for you to sign up and know what you're going to do and know how much you're going to get paid and manage your agreement by yourself without any need for an advisor. Where the advisors come in is helping you think through what you want to do on your land and what the right scheme is for you and what the right level of investment is for you. And for that, we see a mixed economy of private advisors that are paid for, and also some natural England style advisors who can advise on the kind of requirements and the kind of legislation and all of that kind of stuff. So that you can choose.
I'm going to ask Letty to put up the results of the poll. I'm hoping that everyone's managed to do it, and this will hopefully be of interest to Janet.
Yeah, very much so. Well, that's great.
95% people plan to take part, which, given the government's, the Secretary of State's hurdle is 70%, which I don't think is ambitious enough. So there we go, 95%.
Under promise and over deliver. That's our mantra.
So that's good. And I think what is interesting for me, certainly, there we go, 80%, over 80% plan to take part in SFI, which is going to be available for everyone. And around half of those on the call are thinking of taking place in local nature recovery, and a few in landscape and some yet to know. So I think that's very helpful and interesting. We've got one more we'll come back to in a second. So there's a question about eligibility on SFI. You did touch on this, but perhaps you could expand it again. I've seen a couple of questions have come in on this. When will SFI be available to non-BPS applicants? This person, Adrian Joy, is a small poultry farmer and has already started doing environmental work, but can't get into SFI. So I understand the reason, BPS is easy because they're all there, it's on the system, on the RPA. When will it be available to sort of to non-BPS recipients?
I don't know yet is the honest answer to that, because we need to see how we get on with delivering for next year and how complicated it is to then extend the eligibility. But the intention is that it will be there certainly by the time we have the full scheme operational by 2024. But exactly when that will happen between 2022 and 24, we don't know yet. We'll share that once we've got to that point in our delivery and our planning. And it's important to say that I do really appreciate the need for you to know that answer. So I don't lightly say I don't know yet. I'm just being honest about where we are in our planning and trying not to make all of the decisions right now in a way that we can't actually keep to. So I'd much prefer to say to you, I don't know, than promise you a date that I'm not confident we can deliver.
Okay, so there's a question, a number of people have asked this, there's in particular someone, Toby Everett and others. What can be done to ensure the RPA can manage the administration effectively? And perhaps I could tie on to that. SFI next year is about soils, which is something that's not currently paid for through CS. So that was a nice one to start with, because there's no obvious conflict, because we all understand government can't pay for things twice. Yeah. But as you move into 23 and 24, those that are in CS agreements or going into CS agreements, you're going to get this overlap, and you're going to have parcels of land. Can you put that particular field? Can it be in CS and also something in SFI? And it's potentially going to be extremely complicated. And how do you see that happening?
Yeah, so there's two issues here. So we want people to be able to come into SFI alongside existing agreements. But you can only do that if we're not paying you for the exact same thing twice, because obviously that's not an appropriate use of government money to pay you for the same tree twice. So we can't do that. And also we can't pay you to do something that that is contradictory to something else you've already committed to do. So for example, on the soil standards, if you've already said you're going to convert a parcel of land into woodland, then we're not going to pay you to put a cover crop on that land, because those two things can't both be true at the same time. So we are working now. So for next year, if you've got a CS agreement for hedgerows, for example, around the outside of your parcel, you can come into SFI for the soil in the parcel. And we're working on the detailed kind of design of how that works in the process and in the service now. Having worked that out for these standards, where there's very little overlap with existing CS, but there are some potential contradictions. Once we've learned how to do it, we will then know how to do it for the remaining standards, where there's much more overlap between the Sustainable Farming Incentive standards and the Countryside Stewardship standards. There's a few things that we've said about this. One is that you shouldn't be at any disadvantage if you're doing something through CS rather than SFI, and that's why we're reviewing the payment rates across all schemes, not just having different payment rates for SFI and Countryside Stewardship. So if you're thinking about doing stuff, do it and it's not available through SFI yet, then do it through CS, and we'll eventually move you across to SFI when those particular standards become available. And in terms of the administration, so that's how we're going to manage it. We're going to keep learning about how best to do it in a way that's as straightforward as possible for farmers and gives us what we need as the administrators, but isn't complicated, ideally. And that complexity is why we can't do it overnight, and why we need to deliver in an incremental way over time. But it can be done. There are much more complicated computer systems that exist in the world, so it should be possible for us to do it. In terms of the administration, I think it would be fair for me to say, on behalf of RPA colleagues, they've made a lot of improvements in recent years in terms of making payments on time, where they now make 98% of payments within the window rather than more like 30 a few years ago. But we all know there's a lot more to do to improve the speed of processing applications, speed of dealing with queries, and the kind of overall administration. And I think a lot of the worry about administration actually comes down to how inspections work too. And we've already made some improvements to that since leaving the EU at the end of last year, where we've given inspectors more discretion to be able to spot when there's been an honest error rather than a deliberate breach, for example, and to issue warning letters rather than penalties where that seems like the appropriate course of action. So we're not wasting any time in making improvements from now in the way things operate, and then we'll take those improvements into the new scheme. And obviously the proof of the pudding will be in the eating over the next few years. So when we talk again in a couple of years, I hope you'll all be saying, gosh, things are much better, aren't they? And if you're not seeing that, then you can let me know, and we'll keep learning and improving as we go.
Brilliant. We're going to do this second and final poll, and this is really about one of the schemes that's live in development, getting government are looking for feedback on, is the exit scheme, which will become available next year. You will have hopefully read about it. And I know I know Janet would be interested to know people's views on this. We're not going to discuss the details unless people have particular questions, but are you considering taking part in the exit scheme? Yes or no? And are you aware of neighbours or tenants interested in applying for the exit scheme? Just be interested in a straw poll while we've got your attention.
Is it helpful if I just say a sentence about what it is?
Please do.
Just in case anybody hasn't. So this is a scheme where you can apply in 2022 to take your remaining basic payment entitlements all in one go, instead of sitting out the rest of the transition as they decline. And that the idea of that is to help give farmers some capital to help them leave the sector if that's what they want to do. We're not trying to encourage anyone to leave, we're not trying to make anyone leave, but we know that there are some farmers who would like to but don't have the capital to enable them to do that, and that's what this scheme is for. And there's a consultation out at the moment about it, so if you're interested and you haven't seen it whilst you're doing the survey, I'll post you a link to the consultation, because it closes on the 11th of August, so there's still time to tell us your views.
Okay, and please do. And while people are answering that, I've got a question here. So I'm going to move on to some other areas, try and get through as many as possible. What about payments for public access? And this is from Rachel Heppenson. Surely the past year has proved the benefits of this as a public good for public money. Where do you see this fitting into the different ELM schemes, and when will we hear more?
So public access, along with heritage, they are public goods that we have identified as things that we all pay for. We're already starting to pay for some of that through the Farming and Protected Landscape scheme. So if you're in a protected landscape, talk to your protected landscape body, whether that's a national park or an AONB, and there's some funding that's going out through them, which includes public access alongside environmental improvements.
Okay. there's a question about animal health and welfare. Well, various questions I've seen. One, is it voluntary? Secondly, can you just go into that one and not the other SFIs? And then linked to animal welfare, the opportunity for capital grants to support local abattoirs. You'll be well aware of the demise of local abattoirs, which really flies in the face of, you know, where probably we want to be going as a food industry. Certainly if you read the food strategy from Henry Dimbleby. Thanks.
Yeah, and I would recommend the food strategy as a really interesting, thorough piece of analysis, actually, if you haven't seen it yet. It's quite a serious piece of work, and the government will respond properly in due course to its recommendations. So I'm obviously not commenting on the government's view on the recommendations, but it's a high quality piece of work, I think it would be fair to say. In terms of animal health and welfare, it is voluntary, the annual health and welfare review, but that is for a time limited period. And so it'll be voluntary over the next 2 or 3 years. We haven't yet said exactly what will happen after that, but I think it would be fair to expect a direction of travel where eventually it's expected that everyone does that and that government doesn't have to fund it, given that you get private benefits from doing this sort of thing, as well as the public benefit of animal health and welfare. But for now, what we've said is that we will pay for this because we want to support and encourage more farmers to undertake that sort of activity and see the value of it over the next 2 or 3 years. You can't enter into just the annual health and welfare review. Oh no, sorry, you can. Sorry, I don't know why I said can't then. In my head, I was saying can. That was weird. You can just do the annual health and welfare review. So you can just select that and not go into the environmental standards if you want to answer that question. And then on capital grants, so there will be capital grants available for productivity, and also we're expecting to make capital grants available for animal health and welfare, where that's a helpful kind of intervention to make. We don't currently have plans for grants for local abattoirs. I am aware that this is a hot topic for those who are particularly concerned about it, and we are listening carefully to those views, but we don't have plans at the moment to make that investment.
Okay, I'm going to ask Letty to put up the results. So that's interesting. 7% are considering it. Obviously, we don't know the details, so I'm assuming that's not a definite, but considering it. And 20% are aware of neighbours or tenants interested. So that's it. That's very interesting. Thank you.
Yeah, right.
Higher or lower than you expected, Janet?
I think I was just thinking, where was I expecting that to be? I think that's probably roughly where I'd expect it to be at this stage, actually, with people thinking about it. I wouldn't expect actually that 7% to actually then take it later, but I think that's roughly in line with where I'd have expected it to be at this stage.
Couple of questions sort of unrelated, one on tax and one on tenants. The question from James Joycey: a brief comment would be very welcome on how conversations with owner-occupied farmers compared to conversations with tenant farmers across all 3 levels, as in SFI and LNR. There are obvious differences in the degree of control between the 2 categories. Perhaps you could comment on that and how you see that working, particularly for the more longer-term schemes.
This is such a complicated question. We could easily have spent the entire time talking about that, because the short answer is it depends on the nature of the land ownership and the nature of the relationship between the owner and the tenant and the nature of the tenancy. So there is no slick answer to this, I don't think. It's worth saying that, I think it's unlikely, and if you were a tenant, that you'd be entering into a landscape recovery project, but you might do in partnership with a landowner. And I've certainly met farmers on estates where all of the tenants and the estate are collaborating to take part in schemes. I've also met people where the landowner are the ones who insist on the schemes, and I've also met people where it's the tenants who really want to do the schemes, and they just get the landowner's permission and they let them do it as long as they don't make the farm too messy or reduce its value. And so it just really depends. One thing I will say about tenants is that we are working hard to make sure that the sustainable farming incentive in particular, but also the other schemes, are accessible to tenants, and that they have every opportunity to take part. And we're thinking about some of the thorny issues around who gets paid for the public goods. And what's the relationship between the landowner and the tenant in the situation where public goods are being produced on the land?
Okay, thank you. I'm conscious of time, and probably 2 quick more questions. Tax treatment for environmental management. I know this is something we've been working with you and Treasury on at CLA, but is Defra working with HMRC to clarify environmental management in treatment of agricultural activity? Because it mustn't be something that prevents people because they're nervous about different tax treatments.
in the departments that do on these issues. It's a short answer.
Janet, I'm conscious we've got to 12 o'clock and you very kindly given us an hour of your time. So we've got a vast number of questions and we've only managed to get to some of them. So apologies if we haven't answered them. We will print them off and come back. Susan, hopefully, and her team might be able to come back on some of them.
You're welcome to send them to me and I can ask the team.
Well,
sorry, Mark, I was going to say you're welcome to send them on to me and we can sort out answers.
Brilliant. Well, we'll do that. I'm going to ask Janet, thank you very much for that. And please do, I know from our engagement with Janet that she's very approachable. So Twitter or email. And on here, you can see, well, you had on the chat the blog from Defra, which is very good to follow. I'd also recommend this, the CLA's Agricultural Transition Hub, where we've got links to a lot of this stuff and also our own commentary. And that whole co-design work, as Janet said, I mean, we and a number of people on this call are engaging in that. So, you know, if you do have strong views and you want to get engaged, there's plenty of opportunity to do so. So with that, thank you, Susan, very much for setting the scene very effectively. And Janet, thank you very much for being so open with your discussion. And hopefully we'll have you back again in a few months' time as the next pieces unfold.
Thanks very much for having me.
All right. Bye, everybody.